The screaming wasn't coming from a man. It was the sound of 1,200 pounds of pure rage and muscle slamming against reinforced steel, a rhythm so violent it rattled the bones of everyone within 50 feet. The impact echoed through the climate-controlled halls of Tommaso Marchese's private equestrian facility like a war drum, each blow a reminder of his single, public failure. Aries. The black Andalusian stallion was supposed to be a crown jewel, a statement piece of power and prestige. Instead, he'd become a million-dollar embarrassment locked behind bulletproof glass and titanium bars. 5 professional trainers had quit. 2 had been hospitalized. The last one, a decorated equestrian champion from Austria, had left in tears, whispering something about the devil himself inhabiting that horse. Tommaso stood in the observation gallery above the arena, his tailored charcoal suit sharp enough to cut glass. At 33, he'd built an empire on precision and fear. His word was law from the Brooklyn docks to the Manhattan penthouses. He controlled politicians, owned judges, and could make entire families disappear with a single phone call. But he couldn't control one horse. The stallion reared again, hooves striking the reinforced gate with enough force to dent the metal. His coat gleamed like polished obsidian under the LED lights, muscles rippling beneath skin pulled taut with fury. Beautiful. Deadly. Untouchable. Tommaso's jaw tightened as his second-in-command, Marco, shifted uncomfortably beside him. "Boss, maybe we should just... don't." The single word dropped like a guillotine blade. Tommaso's dark eyes never left the horse. "I don't accept failure, Marco. Not in my business. Not in my stable. The new specialist is here." Tommaso's eyebrow lifted. "The one from Texas?" "Yeah." "But boss..." Marco hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "She's not what we expected." The soundproof door to the observation deck hissed open. She walked in like she owned the place. Not with arrogance that would have been easier to dismiss. She moved with the kind of quiet confidence that came from facing down things far more dangerous than armed men in expensive suits. Her leather jacket was worn soft at the elbows, her jeans faded from actual work, not fashion. Dust still clung to her brown boots, and her honey-blonde hair was pulled back in a practical braid that had seen wind and sun. Janet Boone was 25 years old and looked like she'd taken a wrong turn somewhere between a rodeo and reality. She didn't acknowledge Tommaso immediately. Her attention was fixed entirely on the stallion below, her clear blue eyes tracking every movement, every tense muscle, every frustrated breath. She watched Aries like she was reading a book written in a language only she understood. Tommaso descended the stairs to the main floor, his footsteps precise and measured. Marco followed at a respectful distance. "You're the specialist?" Tommaso's voice carried the kind of skepticism that had made grown men reconsider their life choices. Janet finally turned to look at him. Those blue eyes were unsettling, not cold, but absolutely unimpressed by the power radiating off him in waves. A slight smile touched her lips, more amusement than respect. "You're the owner?" Her Texan drawl was soft, almost lazy, but somehow managed to make it sound like a challenge. "I expected someone who knew the difference between breaking a horse and breaking its spirit." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Marco's hand instinctively moved toward his jacket. Tommaso raised one finger, barely a movement, and Marco froze. "I hired the best trainers money could buy," Tommaso said, his voice dangerously quiet. "They all failed. What makes you think you'll succeed where they didn't?" Janet's gaze drifted back to Aries, who was now pacing his enclosure like a caged predator. "Because they tried to dominate him. Force doesn't work on a creature like that." She paused, tilting her head slightly. "But you already know that, don't you? That's why you called me." She didn't wait for permission. She simply walked toward the arena entrance, her boots echoing on the polished concrete. Tommaso followed, his curiosity now sharper than his irritation. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "My job." "Hi, lovelies. Quickly tell me your country and what time it is over there. Let's connect in the comment section." She stopped at the gate to Aries' enclosure. The stallion immediately pivoted, nostrils flaring, eyes wild. He charged the barrier, stopping just short of impact, hooves striking the ground hard enough to crack the concrete. The sound was thunder. The message was clear. Death waited behind that door. Janet didn't flinch. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small leather pouch, worn smooth from years of handling. The scent that drifted from it was subtle herbs, earth, something ancient. She didn't offer it to the horse. She didn't make any aggressive moves. Instead, she did something that made Tommaso's blood run cold with its sheer audacity. She closed her eyes. The stallion pawed the ground, muscles coiling for another assault. Janet took a slow, deliberate breath, her chest rising and falling with absolute calm. Then she began to hum. It wasn't a song, not exactly. It was something deeper, more primal, a low, rhythmic melody that seemed to vibrate through the air itself, resonating in the steel beams and concrete walls. The sound was ancient, carrying weight and memory that predated language. Ares froze mid-step. His ears, which had been pinned flat against his skull, slowly swiveled forward. The wild fury in his eyes flickered, confusion replacing rage. His breathing, harsh and rapid just moments before, began to slow. Janet continued humming, the sound steady and hypnotic. She opened her eyes, those clear, unflinching blue eyes, and extended one hand, palm up, toward the gate. The stallion's nostrils flared, testing the air. He took one step forward, then another. His massive head lowered, inch by careful inch, until his warm breath ghosted across her palm. The silence in the facility was absolute. Tommaso realized he'd stopped breathing. Ares the untamable, the destroyer of careers, the symbol of everything Tommaso couldn't control, pressed his forehead against the gate, where Janet's hand rested. A sound rumbled from deep in the horse's chest. Not aggression. Submission. Janet opened her eyes fully, and for the first time since entering, she looked directly at Tommaso. Her expression was calm, but there was something in her gaze, a knowing, a challenge, a promise of truths he wasn't ready to hear. "You've got a problem, Mr. Marchesi," she said quietly, her hand still resting against the now docile stallion's face. "But it's not the one you think." Tommaso found his voice, though it came out rougher than intended. "Explain." She finally stepped back from the gate, and Ares whickered softly, a sound of protest, of loss. Janet's jaw tightened as she studied the horse with professional intensity. This isn't an aggressive animal. This is a terrified one. She turned to face Tommaso fully, and the weight of her stare pinned him in place. Someone broke him, deliberately, methodically. And whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun. "You're telling me someone sabotaged my horse?" The danger in Tommaso's voice was palpable. "I'm telling you someone sabotaged you." Janet crossed her arms, her confidence unwavering. "The horse is just the weapon. And the person who wielded it? They're still here." Tommaso's mind raced, calculating angles, identifying threats, running through every person who had access to his stable. Betrayal was a currency he understood, but this was surgical, personal. "How do you know?" he demanded. Janet pulled a small flashlight from her belt and clicked it on, directing the beam through the gate toward Ares's flanks. "See those marks? Faint, almost invisible unless you know what you're looking for. That's nerve damage from repeated, targeted electrical stimulus. Not enough to scar. Just enough to create a trigger response, fear, aggression, panic. Someone conditioned him to be uncontrollable." She clicked off the light and met his eyes again. "This wasn't random cruelty, Mr. Marchesi. This was a message. Someone wanted you to fail publicly. They wanted everyone to see that the great Tommaso Marchesi couldn't even tame a horse." The rage that flooded through Tommaso was ice-cold and absolute. Someone had struck at him through an animal. They'd made him look weak. They'd infiltrated his inner circle and executed a plan right under his nose. And this woman, this cowgirl with dust on her boots and steel in her spine, had seen through it in minutes. "What do you need?" The question came out as a command, but for once Tommaso didn't care. Janet's slight smile returned, that hint of dry humor dancing at the corners of her mouth. Full access, no restrictions, no questions, and everyone, including you, stays away from Aries unless I say otherwise. That's not how things work here. Then you'll keep having a dangerous, unpredictable animal that makes you look incompetent." She shrugged. "Your choice." The audacity should have enraged him. Instead, Tommaso felt something unfamiliar stirring respect. Possibly fascination. "Done," he said. "You move into the compound. Guest wing, 3rd floor. Marco will show you. I'll stay in the stable quarters. Closer to Aries." "The stable quarters aren't suitable for a woman?" Janet's eyebrow arched. "Mr. Marchesi? I've slept in barns, deserts, and once in a trailer during a Category 3 hurricane. Your climate-controlled stable will be a vacation." Despite everything, the threat, the betrayal, the chaos, Tommaso felt his lips twitch toward something that might have been a smile. "What's your name, cowgirl?" "Janet Boone. And before you ask, yes, related to Daniel." "No, I don't care if that impresses you." This time, Tommaso did smile. It was a dangerous expression, all sharp edges and calculation. "Marco, set up Miss Boone in the stable quarters, full security clearance, and send word anyone who approaches the Stallion without her explicit permission answers to me personally." Marco nodded and pulled out his phone. Tommaso stepped closer to Janet, close enough that most people would have retreated. She held her ground, that infuriating calm never wavering. "Find whoever did this," he said quietly, his voice dropping to the lethal register reserved for his darkest business. "And when you do, you tell me first. This betrayal ends in blood." Janet met his stare without flinching. "I'll find them, but the betrayal ends however I decide it ends. Aries is my priority now, everything else is secondary." For a long moment, they stood locked in silent battle, two immovable forces testing boundaries. Finally, Tommaso nodded once. "We'll see, Miss Boone." She turned toward the stable entrance, then paused, glancing back over her shoulder. "One more thing, Mr. Marchesi. That technique I used? The humming? It's not magic. It's trust. Something your horse has never been given." Her blue eyes glinted. "Maybe you should think about why that is." She walked away, leaving Tommaso standing in his pristine arena, surrounded by his power and his empire, feeling for the first time in years like he was the one being evaluated and found wanting. Janet made it 3 steps before his voice stopped her. "Miss Boone." Not a request, not quite a command, something in between that made her pause, her hand tightening on her duffel strap. She turned slowly, finding Tommaso standing exactly where she'd left him, his posture rigid, his dark eyes burning with questions he clearly wasn't accustomed to asking. "We're not done," he said quietly. She walked back toward him, closing the distance, until they stood face to face once more, the space between them crackling with unspoken tension. Marco shifted uncomfortably near the corridor entrance, but neither of them acknowledged him. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. Tommaso stood perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed on Janet with an intensity that had made hardened criminals reconsider their choices. She met his gaze without flinching, that infuriating calm wrapped around her like armor. "Explain," he said finally. "Not a request, a command." Janet glanced back at Aries, who was still pressed against the gate, watching her with those intelligent eyes. "It's called the trust technique, based on ancient horsemanship principles, predating modern training by centuries. It works on the theory that animals, especially traumatized ones, respond to genuine calm rather than forced dominance." "That's not what I'm asking about." Tommaso's voice dropped lower. "You said someone did this deliberately. Prove it." She pulled a small flashlight from her jacket pocket and gestured toward the Stallion. "Look at his flanks. Right side, just below the ribcage." Tommaso moved to the gate, and despite Aries's previous violence, the horse didn't react. He was too focused on Janet, as if she were the only stable point in a shifting world. The marks were faint, barely visible against the black coat, thin, precise lines that could have been mistaken for natural variations in the hair. "Nerve damage," Janet said quietly. "From repeated electrical stimulus. Not enough to scar, obviously, but enough to create a conditioned response." Someone used a modified cattle prod or similar device. Low voltage, high frequency, applied in specific patterns. Tommaso's jaw tightened. How do you know it wasn't accidental? Bad handling during transport? Because of the placement. She pointed without touching. These marks target specific nerve clusters. Whoever did this knew equine anatomy intimately. They weren't trying to break him physically, they were programming a psychological response. Every time he's handled a certain way, touched with certain materials, or exposed to specific stimuli, his nervous system triggers panic, making him appear untamable, making him a public failure for whoever owned him. Janet's blue eyes found his. This wasn't random cruelty, Mr. Marchesi. This was tactical. Someone wanted you to look weak. Wanted everyone to see that the great Tommaso Marchesi couldn't even control a horse. The rage that flooded through him was ice-cold and surgical. Someone had struck at him through an animal, had made him waste 3 months and 5 trainers, had infiltrated his operation with enough skill to go completely undetected. Who? That's what I need time to figure out. She crossed her arms. Ares will tell me. Animals don't lie. They can't. His reactions will point to whoever traumatized him. He'll recognize them by scent, by movement patterns, by the materials they used. Tommaso's mind raced through possibilities, analyzing every person with access to the stable. His fingers itched for his phone, for the ability to start tearing apart personnel files and security footage. What do you need? Everything I said before. 48 hours minimum, full access, no supervision. Janet paused, then added, and I need to move into the compound. I have to be near Ares around the clock. His trust is fragile right now. If I leave and come back, I'll have to rebuild it from zero. The guest wing. Stable quarters. Her tone was firm. I need to be within sight of his stall. He needs to see me, hear me, know I'm not abandoning him. Marco shifted uncomfortably. Boss, the stable quarters are just converted storage. Then convert them properly. Tommaso's eyes never left Janet's face. Full amenities. Whatever she needs. Janet's slight smile returned. A bed, running water, and Wi-Fi are fine. I'm not here for luxury. No. Tommaso stepped closer, deliberately invading her space. Most people retreated when he did this. She held her ground, and he found himself oddly satisfied by her stubbornness. You're here because you see things others miss. Because that horse responded to you in 30 seconds when 5 professionals failed in 3 months. Because you just told me I have a traitor in my organization. So you're not just a specialist anymore, Miss Boone, you're an asset. His voice dropped to the dangerous register that made his enemies nervous. And I protect my assets. I don't need protection. Everyone needs protection in my world. He let the weight of that statement settle. You're not in Texas anymore. This compound, these people, they operate by rules you don't understand. Rules I enforce. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Not fear, more like acknowledgement. Then we need to establish something right now, Mr. Marchesi. I'll follow your security protocols. I'll respect your authority in your compound. But when it comes to Ares, when it comes to my methods, my timeline, my decisions about his care, no one questions me. Not your men. Not your advisors. She paused. Not even you. The audacity should have enraged him. Instead, Tommaso felt that spark of fascination sharpen into something closer to admiration. You're asking me to give you complete autonomy in my own facility. I'm telling you those are my terms. No arrogance in her voice. Just certainty. You can accept them, or I leave and you continue failing with the next specialist you hire. Marco made a small sound of protest. Tommaso raised one hand, silencing him without looking away from Janet. The power shift was happening. He could feel it, this woman who'd walked into his world and immediately disrupted the careful hierarchy he'd built. She wasn't asking for permission. She was establishing boundaries. And the truly fascinating part? She was right. He did need her. Done, he said finally. But understand something, Miss Boone. You're asking for trust I don't give easily. If you abuse it, if you're wrong about this sabotage, if you waste my time, if you betray me in any way, the consequences will be severe. I'm not wrong." Her blue eyes were steady as stone. "And I don't betray people who keep their word." Tommaso found himself almost smiling. Almost. "Marco, show Miss Boone to the stable quarters, make sure they're properly equipped by tonight. And send word to all personnel, no one approaches stall 7 or speaks to Miss Boone without my explicit permission." "Yes, boss." Janet picked up her duffel bag, small, worn, containing everything she'd brought to his $1 million compound, and slung it over her shoulder. She started to follow Marco, then paused, glancing back. "One more thing, Mr. Marchesi. Whoever did this, they're still here. Still watching, and when Ares identifies them, you're going to have to decide something." "What?" "Whether you can handle the truth." Her smile was slight, almost sad. "Sometimes the betrayal comes from the places we least expect." She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the pristine arena. Tommaso stood alone, staring at Ares. The stallion was watching Janet leave, a soft whicker of protest escaping him. His phone buzzed. A message from Silvio. "Heard about the new specialist. Want me to run a background check?" Tommaso typed back. "Already done. Focus on the facility audit I requested." He pocketed his phone and looked back at the stallion. Ares's eyes, intelligent, wounded, wary, met his through the bulletproof glass. "You know who did this to you, don't you?" Tommaso said quietly. "You're just waiting for someone to listen." The horse snorted, pawing the ground once. Tommaso turned toward the exit, his mind already cataloging every person who'd had access to Ares. The list was shorter than it should be. Only trusted personnel were allowed near his private stable, which meant the traitor was someone he'd vetted personally. Someone he trusted. The thought sent cold fury through his veins. Across the compound, Silvio stood in the shadows of the administrative building, watching the stable entrance. He'd seen the woman arrive, the battered truck, the casual confidence, the way Marchese's body language had shifted in her presence. Interesting. He pulled out his phone and made a call. It rang twice before connecting. "We have a problem," he said quietly. "The cowgirl isn't just a trainer." The voice on the other end was cautious. "Can you handle it?" Silvio watched as lights flickered on in the stable quarters, Janet Boone settling into her new accommodations, less than 50 feet from the horse that could destroy everything. His expression remained perfectly neutral, but his eyes were cold as winter ice. "I'll handle it," he said. "Just like I handle everything else." He ended the call and slipped his phone back into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the custom leather belt he always wore, expensive, distinctive, Italian-made. Completely unremarkable. Dawn broke over the compound like molten gold. But Janet had been awake for hours. She'd learned long ago that horses didn't respect human schedules. They operated on instinct, on the ancient rhythms of prey animals who slept in fragments and woke at the slightest disturbance. If she wanted Ares to trust her, she needed to exist in his world, not force him into hers. The stable quarters were surprisingly comfortable. Someone had worked through the night to install a proper bed, a small kitchenette, and update the bathroom. But Janet had barely noticed. She'd spent most of the night in a chair positioned directly in front of Ares's stall, watching him, letting him watch her, building trust through presence, through silence. Now, in the early morning light filtering through the skylights, she was in the stall with him. The armed guard who'd tried to stop her, a square-jawed man named Anthony, had lasted exactly 30 seconds against her calm insistence before radioing Marco. Marco had radioed Tommaso, and Tommaso, to his credit, had simply said, "Let her work." Ares stood perfectly still as she ran her hands along his flanks, her touch light and clinical. She wasn't petting him, she was reading him. Every flinch, every tense muscle, every nervous twitch told her something about what he'd endured. "Someone hurt you here," she murmured, her fingers finding a spot just below his shoulder blade where the nerve damage was most concentrated. Repeatedly. Always the same spot. "They wanted to make sure you associated handling with pain." The stallion's ear flicked back, listening. "But you're not broken. You're angry. There's a difference." She moved to his other side, continuing her examination. Anger means you still have fight, still have spirit. That's what we're going to work with. Footsteps approached expensive shoes on concrete, measured and deliberate. You're in the stall with him. Janet didn't turn at Tommaso's voice. Good morning to you too, Mr. Marchesi. Every professional I hired refused to get this close without sedation and restraints. Then they didn't understand him. She finally glanced over her shoulder. Tommaso stood outside the stall, his suit already immaculate despite the early hour, his dark eyes fixed on her with unnerving intensity. Aries doesn't need to be controlled. He needs to be heard. Horses don't talk. They communicate constantly. You just have to pay attention. She moved to Aries' head, examining his eyes, his mouth, the way he held his neck. See how his pupils dilate slightly when someone walks past? That's hypervigilance. Trauma response. He's constantly scanning for threats. Tommaso moved closer to the stall door, and immediately Aries' head jerked up, ears pinning flat. He's reacting to you, Janet observed. I've noticed. It's not personal. You represent authority, dominance, everything that's been used against him. She ran a soothing hand down Aries' neck, and gradually the tension eased. He can't separate you from his trauma yet. That'll take time. How much time? Depends on whether we can identify and remove the source of his trauma. She met his gaze squarely. The person who did this needs to be nowhere near this stable. Their presence alone will undermine everything I'm trying to do. Tommaso's jaw tightened. I'm working on it. Work faster. The blunt command should have been offensive. Instead, Tommaso found himself almost smiling. This woman spoke to him the way no one had in years, without fear, without calculation, just direct honesty. You don't have much respect for authority, do you, Miss Boone? I have plenty of respect for earned authority. Her blue eyes glinted with dry humor. I just don't confuse expensive suits with competence. Careful, cowgirl. Some people would call that disrespectful. Some people waste time worrying about respect instead of solving problems. She turned back to Aries, effectively dismissing him. Your horse doesn't care about your title, Mr. Marchesi. Neither do I. We both just want the truth. For a long moment, Tommaso stood there, watching her work. Her movements were graceful, efficient, a dancer's precision applied to veterinary care. Aries, who'd tried to kill 2 men, stood docile under her hands, occasionally turning his head to gently bump her shoulder. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. I'll be in the observation gallery, Tommaso said finally. If you need anything, I'll be fine. She didn't look up. But Mr. Marchesi? Stay quiet. Your energy affects him. He wanted to argue, wanted to assert that this was his facility, his rules. Instead, he simply nodded and left, climbing the stairs to the viewing gallery where he could watch without interfering. The hours passed like a meditation. Janet worked with Aries, not training him, just existing alongside him. She brought him water, adjusted his bedding, sang softly in that same ancient rhythm that had first calmed him. Occasionally she'd leave for a few minutes, and Aries would pace anxiously until she returned. Tommaso found himself mesmerized, not just by her skill, but by her absolute focus. She moved through his compound as if she owned it, completely unbothered by the armed guards, the surveillance cameras, the weight of his organization surrounding her. Around noon, Silvio appeared in the gallery. Boss, the audit files you requested. He set down a tablet. Leave them. Silvio hesitated, his eyes drifting to the arena below where Janet was now sitting in the corner of Aries' stall, reading a book while the horse dozed nearby. The new specialist seems unconventional. She's effective. Still, a young woman, alone in the stable, no security experience. Silvio's tone was carefully neutral. I could assign someone to keep an eye on her, for her own protection. No. Tommaso's voice was flat. She works alone. Those are her terms. Of course, boss. Silvio started to leave, and as he passed by the window, something happened below. Aries exploded into motion. The stallion lurched to his feet, ears pinned flat, eyes rolling white. He screamed that primal sound of pure terror and crashed against the stall wall hard enough to rattle the entire structure. Janet was on her feet instantly, positioning herself between the horse and the door, her voice low and urgent. "Easy, easy, boy. You're safe, you're safe." But Aries wasn't calming. He was fixed on something outside the stall, every muscle rigid with fear-driven aggression. Tommaso's eyes tracked the horse's line of sight. Silvio had stopped walking. He stood perfectly still in the gallery, his expression unreadable, his hand resting casually on the railing. And Aries was staring directly at him. Janet's head turned sharply, following the horse's gaze. Her eyes found Silvio, then flicked to Tommaso. Her expression was neutral, but something in her body language shifted a predator, recognizing another predator. Silvio offered a slight, professional smile. "Apologies. I didn't mean to disturb the animal." He left. The moment the door closed behind him, Aries began to calm, his breathing gradually slowing, the wild panic receding like a tide. Janet stood motionless, staring at the spot where Silvio had been. Tommaso was already moving, descending the stairs 3 at a time. He reached the arena floor just as Janet emerged from the stall, her face set in grim lines. "What just happened?" he demanded. "Your capo happened." She crossed her arms. "That's the third time." "Third time?" "This morning." Someone walked past the stable entrance, tall, dark suit. Aries panicked. "An hour ago I heard your capo's voice in the corridor outside." Same reaction. Janet's blue eyes were hard as diamonds. "Just now makes 3. Every single time that man gets within sensing distance, your horse loses his mind." Tommaso's blood ran cold. "Silvio has been with me for 8 years. He's my head of acquisitions. He personally sourced Aries. Then he personally traumatized him too." No hesitation. No doubt. The horse hates him. And when a horse like that hates a man like him, you better start paying attention. "You're accusing my most trusted advisor of sabotage based on a horse's reaction? I'm telling you what I see." Janet stepped closer, her voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. "Animals don't have agendas, Mr. Marchesi. They don't play politics. They can't lie. Aries is terrified of that man, specifically that man. Not your other guards, not Marco, just him." Tommaso's mind raced. Silvio had been invaluable, efficient, loyal, discreet. He'd handled sensitive acquisitions, managed complex logistics, never failed a single assignment. But he'd also been present for every stage of Aries's acquisition and transport. "What do you need to prove it?" Tommaso asked quietly. "Access to everything Silvio touched during the acquisition. Shipping manifests, veterinary records, equipment logs, and I need to examine his personal effects. That's necessary." Janet's gaze was steady. "If I'm wrong, you lose nothing. If I'm right, you identify the person who's been undermining you for 3 months." Tommaso stared at her, this 25-year-old woman who'd walked into his world and immediately started unraveling conspiracies. "You realize what you're asking? If Silvio is loyal and discovers we investigated him, then you explain that due diligence isn't personal. She didn't back down. But, Mr. Marchesi? In my experience, innocent people don't make horses react like that. Guilty ones do." For a long moment, they stood in charged silence. Finally, Tommaso pulled out his phone. "Marco. I need you in the arena. Now." He ended the call and looked back at Janet. Her expression was calm, but he could see the steel beneath it, the absolute certainty that she was right. And beneath his own skepticism, in the cold, calculating part of his mind that had kept him alive in a dangerous world, Tommaso was starting to believe she might be. The question was, what would he do when she proved it? The compound felt different at 2 in the morning, quieter, darker. The armed guards still patrolled in their precise rotations, and the security cameras still swept their designated sectors, but there was a heaviness to the night air tension that had nothing to do with Janet or the horse. She'd felt it building all evening, the increased radio chatter, the way Marco's jaw had been clenched during dinner. The fact that Tommaso had disappeared into his office at 7 and hadn't emerged since. Something was happening, something that made dangerous men nervous. Janet sat in the corner of Ares's stall, her back against the wall, watching the stallion doze. He was sleeping better now, still fractured, still vigilant, but no longer pacing through the night in constant panic. Progress, measured in breaths and heartbeats. The stable door opened with a soft metallic whisper. Ares's head lifted immediately, ears swiveling forward. Janet rose fluidly, her hand moving instinctively to the lead rope coiled at her belt. Not a weapon, but the closest thing she had to one. Footsteps, measured, deliberate, familiar. Tommaso emerged from the shadows, and Janet barely recognized him. Gone was the immaculate suit, the polished shoes, the armor of expensive fabric and Italian tailoring. He wore dark jeans and a simple black Henley that clung to his frame, the sleeves pushed up to his forearms. His hair, usually perfectly styled, was disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. He looked human, tired, almost vulnerable. "Couldn't sleep?" Janet asked quietly. "Didn't try." He moved to the stall door but didn't enter, respecting the boundary she'd established. "Tomorrow's complicated." The security increase wasn't subtle. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Nothing about my business is subtle, but tomorrow requires precision, high stakes, no room for error." Janet studied him in the dim, stable light. The tension radiating off him was different from his usual controlled intensity. This was stress, raw and unfiltered. "You want to talk about it? Or are you just here to brood in proximity to the horse?" "I don't brood. You're literally standing in a dark stable at 2 a.m., staring into the middle distance. That's textbook brooding." This time his smile was genuine, brief, but real. "May I come in?" Janet glanced at Ares, who was watching Tommaso with wary curiosity rather than outright fear. "Progress. Slowly. Let him see your hands." Tommaso entered the stall with careful movements, keeping his hands visible and relaxed. Ares tensed but didn't panic, a small miracle that wasn't lost on either of them. "He's tolerating you better," Janet observed. "Because you're here." Tommaso stopped a respectful distance away, his dark eyes finding hers. "He trusts you. That extends some grace to people near you. Trust isn't transferable. He's learning to read you differently, seeing that you're not a threat." She paused. "Most of the time." "Most of the time," he echoed. An accurate assessment. They stood in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Ares gradually relaxed, his breathing evening out, his head lowering back toward sleep. "I have 12 meetings tomorrow," Tommaso said quietly. 6 of them are with people who'd kill me if they saw an opening. 3 are with people I might have to kill if they make the wrong move. The remaining 3 are with politicians who'd sell me out for favorable press coverage." "Sounds exhausting." "It's survival. It's what I was born into, trained for, built my entire life around." He leaned against the stall wall, some of the rigid control bleeding out of his posture. "But lately I've been wondering what the point is. Building an empire, maintaining power, staying 3 steps ahead of everyone for what?" Janet moved to check Ares's water bucket, her shoulder briefly brushing Tommaso's arm. "That's a dangerous question for a man in your position." "Everything about my position is dangerous." His voice dropped lower. "You said something the other day, about me not knowing the difference between dominating and partnering. That's been sitting with me." "Good. It should. I've spent my entire adult life ensuring I'm the most powerful person in every room, that no one can touch me, threaten me, control me. But that horse," he gestured toward Ares. "He didn't respond to power. He responded to you, to trust, to partnership. Animals are honest that way. They don't care about your reputation or your bank account. They care about whether you're safe to be around." Tommaso turned to face her fully, and suddenly the space between them felt smaller, charged with something beyond the usual tension. "And am I safe to be around?" Janet met his gaze steadily. The question held layers she wasn't sure either of them were ready to unpack. You haven't given me a reason to think otherwise. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. She reached up to adjust Ares's halter, and Tommaso's hand moved at the same time to steady the buckle. Their fingers brushed, calloused and warm, the contact lasting a heartbeat longer than necessary. Neither of them pulled away immediately. You're good at this, Tommaso murmured, his voice rough. Building trust, making creatures feel safe. How did you learn? By being the opposite of safe for most of my childhood. Janet's tone was matter of fact. My daddy died when I was 8, rodeo accident. After that, my mama worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. I spent most of my time alone with horses because they were cheaper than babysitters and more reliable than people. I'm sorry. Don't be. Those horses taught me everything that matters. Patience, honesty, the difference between control and connection. She finally stepped back, breaking the contact. Your world operates on dominance and fear. Mine operates on trust and respect. They're not compatible. Maybe they could be. Tommaso's intense gaze followed her. You're here, in my world, doing something no one else could do. That's a kind of partnership, a temporary one. Once Ares is stable and we've identified who hurt him, I'm gone. Are you? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Janet turned to face him fully, her blue eyes unreadable. What are you really asking, Mr. Marchesi? I'm asking. He stopped, choosing his words carefully. I'm asking how someone like you, with your skill and integrity, manages to command absolute loyalty from a traumatized animal in days when I can't guarantee loyalty from people I've known for years. You want the secret? Janet crossed her arms. Stop thinking of loyalty as something you take. Start thinking of it as something you earn. Every single day. Through consistency. Through honesty. Through showing up when it's hard. I show up. You show up with power. With threats. With the weight of your empire behind you. Her voice was gentle but uncompromising. That's not the same as showing up as just you. Tommaso was quiet for a long moment. Processing. You're saying I hide behind my authority. I'm saying you've built such effective armor that no one can see the person underneath. Including you. She gestured toward Ares. That horse didn't submit to my technique or my skill. He submitted because I let him see I was just as scared and uncertain as he was. Vulnerability creates connection, Mr. Marchesi. Power creates distance. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he carried that had nothing to do with physical strength. I can't afford vulnerability. In my world, it's a death sentence. Maybe. Or maybe you've convinced yourself of that because it's easier than risking real connection. Janet held his gaze. You asked me my secret. That's it. I let them see me. The whole mess. And I trust that's enough. And if it's not, then it's not. But at least I'm honest about who I am. Tommaso reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat. When she didn't, his hand cupped her jaw, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. The touch sent electricity through her nerve endings, awareness blooming sharp and dangerous. You command more loyalty with a whisper than I do with a dozen armed men, he murmured, his voice dropping to that lethal register that made her breath catch. Tell me your secret, Janet. The use of her first name, the intimacy of it, the way it sounded in his accented English, shifted something fundamental between them. Janet's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice remained steady. I just did. His dark eyes searched hers, looking for something he couldn't name. The air between them felt thick, heavy with possibility and danger in equal measure. Then Ares shifted. Breaking the spell. Tommaso's hand dropped, the moment fracturing. He stepped back, rebuilding his walls in real time. I should let you sleep. Tomorrow will be difficult for everyone. Tommaso. His name felt strange on her tongue, but she used it anyway. Whatever you're walking into tomorrow, be careful. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, that she cared. Careful is how I've stayed alive this long. That's not what I mean. She held his gaze. I mean, don't let your need for control blind you to what's right in front of you. Trust your instincts. The real ones, not the ones shaped by fear. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Get some rest, Janet. He left the way he'd come, silent and deliberate, leaving her alone with Aries and the lingering warmth of his touch on her skin. Janet pressed her hand to her cheek, feeling the ghost of his fingers, and wondered what the hell she'd just gotten herself into. Morning arrived with deceptive calm. Janet was grooming Aries when Silvio appeared at the stable entrance, his expensive suit immaculate despite the early hour, his smile pleasant and professional. Aries's reaction was immediate and visceral, the stallion's head jerked up, ears pinning flat, muscles coiling with barely restrained panic. But this time, Janet was ready. She'd positioned herself specifically for this moment, her body language deliberately casual, her awareness razor-sharp. "Mr. Rossini," she called out, her Texan drawl friendly. "Perfect timing. I was hoping to ask you something." Silvio's smile didn't falter, but she caught the micro-expression, a flicker of calculation behind his eyes. "Of course, Miss Boone. How can I help? You handled Aries's acquisition personally, right? From Spain?" "I did. Beautiful bloodline. The breeders were very proud of him. He stayed near the entrance, maintaining distance. Smart. What kind of tack was he using over there? I'm trying to figure out what equipment might trigger his stress responses." The question was innocuous, natural, exactly the kind of thing a specialist would ask. Silvio's answer came too quickly. "Standard European leather, brown, double-stitched, nothing unusual. I can send you the equipment manifest if that helps." "That'd be great," Janet continued, brushing Aries, her movements soothing. "One more thing. Did they use any specialty items? Custom work? Sometimes breeders have preferences." "Not that I recall. Everything was fairly standard." His tone was perfectly measured. Too perfect. The handlers mentioned he could be spirited, but nothing about specialized equipment. Janet frowned, as if puzzled. "That's strange, because the nerve damage pattern I'm seeing suggests a very specific type of modified leather, not standard at all." Silvio's expression remained neutral, but his hand moved just slightly to adjust his belt. A unconscious gesture. Protective. Janet's eyes tracked the movement, and something clicked into place with devastating clarity. The belt. Expensive, custom-made. A rich, distinctive brown leather with unusual tooling. The exact same shade and texture she'd identified in the faint traces left on Aries's scarring. "Well, I appreciate your help, Mr. Rossini." She kept her voice light. "I'm sure we'll figure it out." "Of course. Good luck with your work, Miss Boone." He nodded politely and left. The moment he was gone, Janet stopped moving. Aries, sensing her tension, pressed his nose against her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that almost broke her heart. "I see you," she whispered to the horse. "I see what he did." She pulled out her phone and texted Tommaso. "Need to talk. Now. Private." The response came within seconds. "My office. 10 minutes." Tommaso's private office was exactly what she expected. Minimalist, expensive, dominated by a massive desk and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the compound. He was standing when she entered, his posture rigid with barely controlled tension. "What did you find?" Janet didn't waste time. "It's the leather." Aries isn't reacting to Silvio as a person, he's reacting to something Silvio wears, something that was used to traumatize him. "Explain." I asked him about Aries's original tack. He answered too fast, too perfectly, like he'd rehearsed it. Then, he unconsciously touched his belt when I mentioned specialized leather. She pulled out her phone, showing him photos she'd taken of Aries's scarring. "This discoloration? It's leather residue. Very specific type, high-end, custom-tooled, and, unless I'm wrong, Silvio's wearing the exact match." Tommaso's eyes went cold. "You want to inspect his belt?" "I want to inspect everything he owns. His office, his quarters, his car. Somewhere, he kept the tools he used. And that leather will match. That's..." Tommaso stopped, his jaw working. That's a massive breach of trust. If you're wrong, I'm not wrong. Janet's voice was absolute. That horse doesn't lie. And neither do I. For a long moment, Tommaso stood frozen, the weight of decision visible on his face. Accusing Silvio, his most trusted advisor, the man who'd been with him for 8 years, was tantamount to declaring war within his own organization. But everything Janet had done so far had been accurate, precise, true. He pulled out his phone. "Marco, my office, now. And bring the master keys." Silvio's private quarters were on the compound's north wing, smaller than Tommaso's but still luxurious. Marco stood guard outside while Janet and Tommaso entered, the violation of privacy hanging heavy between them. "What are we looking for?" Tommaso asked quietly. "Leather goods, belts, straps, anything custom-made, and equipment that could deliver controlled electrical stimulus, modified cattle prods, veterinary tools, anything small enough to hide." They worked methodically. Janet checked the closet while Tommaso searched the desk and dresser. The room was immaculate, almost sterile in its organization. "Here." Janet's voice was tight. Tommaso crossed to where she stood, staring at Silvio's accessory rack. 3 belts hung in precise order, all expensive, all Italian leather. But one was different, the brown one, custom-tooled with an unusual crosshatch pattern. The leather was distinctive, not quite burgundy, not quite chocolate, a specific, expensive shade that required specialized tanning. Janet pulled on gloves she'd brought and carefully removed the belt. Under the LED light of her phone's flashlight, the leather showed microscopic scarring, the kind that came from repeated contact with something sharp or electrified. "This is it," she whispered. "This is what touched him. Look at the tooling pattern, see these marks? That's contact scoring. From a modified probe." Tommaso took the belt from her, his hands steady despite the rage building behind his eyes. He studied it with the clinical attention of a man reading his own death warrant. "He wore this," Tommaso said quietly, "while he tortured my horse, as a trophy. Or as a practical choice. This leather is conductive enough to complete an electrical circuit without obvious damage. Someone with veterinary knowledge would know that." Janet's voice was gentle despite the horror of what they'd uncovered. "He was careful, Tommaso. Methodical. This wasn't rage, it was calculation." Tommaso's fingers tightened on the belt until his knuckles went white. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper and infinitely more terrifying because of it. "He did this to Ares. He did this to me." His dark eyes found hers, and in them Janet saw something that made her blood run cold. Not just anger, not just betrayal. Murder. "He made me look weak, incompetent. For 3 months, every person in my organization watched me fail with that horse, watched me bring in specialist after specialist, watched me lose control." His laugh was hollow. "And he did it. The man I trusted with my most sensitive acquisitions, the man who had access to everything. Tommaso, you saved me." He turned to her, the belt still clenched in his fist, his expression raw. "You walked into my world and saw what no one else could. You exposed the betrayal I was too blind to recognize. The horse exposed it. I just listened." "No." He stepped closer, his intensity overwhelming. "You trusted your instincts when I would have dismissed them. You pushed when I would have retreated. You saw the truth." His free hand cupped her face, the gesture possessive and grateful in equal measure. "You're the source of my salvation and my fury, Janet Boone." The weight of his gaze, the raw emotion in his voice, the danger radiating from him, it should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something shift. A partnership forged not in attraction, but in shared purpose, in truth. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Tommaso's smile was sharp as a blade. Now we give Silvio exactly enough rope to hang himself." The compound felt like a coiled spring. Tommaso had returned Silvio's belt to its exact position, leaving no trace of their intrusion. He'd acted perfectly normal during the afternoon meetings, cold, controlled, giving no indication that he knew, that he'd seen the evidence. That he was planning. But Janet could feel the tension radiating off him like heat from asphalt in summer. Tomorrow morning, Tommaso said, standing in the stable entrance as night fell. I'm scheduling a demonstration ride, showing key associates that Aries is finally manageable. Silvio suggested it this afternoon, said it would restore confidence in my judgment. Janet's blood went cold. He's setting a trap. Without question. Tommaso's voice was calm, almost pleasant. He thinks I'm still blind, still trusting. He'll sabotage the ride, make it look like I can't even handle a tamed horse. Further erosion of my authority. So we don't do it. Simple. No. His dark eyes met hers. We do exactly what he expects, but we control the outcome. Janet studied him, seeing the chess player beneath the rage. You want to catch him in the act. I want him to commit fully. No room for excuses or explanations. I want witnesses. I want proof so absolute that even his allies can't defend him. Tommaso's smile was cold. And then, I want justice. Or revenge. You say that like they're different things. Janet moved closer, her voice dropping. They are different. And you know it. Revenge is about making yourself feel better. Justice is about making things right. He tortured an innocent animal to undermine me. What's right is ensuring he never does it again. Agreed. But how you do it matters. Tommaso, it shapes who you become after this is over. For a moment, he looked almost vulnerable. Then the walls came back up, and he was the mafia boss again, cold, calculating, deadly. Prepare Aries for tomorrow. Make him look perfect, calm, responsive, completely under control. Silvio needs to believe his plan will work. And if he sabotages the tack? If something goes wrong? Then, you'll be watching, and you'll stop it. His hand found hers, squeezing briefly. I trust you, Janet, with the horse, with my life, with the truth. The admission hung between them, weighted with everything they weren't saying. Don't die tomorrow, Janet said quietly. I'd be really annoyed if I went through all this just to watch you get killed by your own capo. Despite everything, Tommaso almost smiled. I'll do my best. The night stretched eternal. Janet tried to sleep but couldn't. Every sound, every shadow felt charged with menace. Aries was restless too, pacing his stall, sensing the tension that permeated the compound like smoke. Around 2 a.m., the stable door opened. Tommaso entered, no longer in his suit but in dark tactical clothing prepared for violence, even if it came from his own organization. Couldn't stay away, Janet asked from her position in Aries's stall. Didn't see the point in pretending to sleep. He approached slowly, and Aries remarkably didn't panic. The Stallion had started to recognize Tommaso as part of Janet's pack, not a threat, but not fully trusted either. They stood together in the dim light, both acutely aware that tomorrow might end in blood. I've been thinking about what you said, Tommaso murmured. About vulnerability creating connection. About letting people see the real you. And I realized something. He turned to face her fully, his expression unguarded in a way she'd never seen. You're the first person in years who's seen me as something other than a weapon or a wallet. You look at me and see. What, exactly? Janet considered the question carefully. I see someone carrying weight he shouldn't have to carry alone, someone who built armor so effective he forgot what it feels like to take it off, someone who's terrified that if people see who he really is, they'll find him insufficient. That's uncomfortably accurate, you asked. She smiled slightly. But for what it's worth. The person under the armor is more interesting than the boss everyone else sees. Tommaso was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, if something goes wrong tomorrow, it won't. But if it does, I need you to promise me something. His intensity was overwhelming. Take Aries and leave. Marco will help you. There's an account, funds set aside. Get out, get safe, and don't look back. I'm not leaving you. Janet. No. Her voice was firm. We're partners now. That means we face this together. Whatever happens, we handle it as a team. The word partners seemed to strike something deep. Tommaso's hand lifted to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. You're either the bravest person I've ever met, he whispered, or the most foolish. Can't it be both? This time his smile was genuine, warm, human. They stayed like that for a heartbeat longer than necessary, the understanding between them solidifying into something unbreakable. Not romance, not yet, but trust, partnership. The foundation of something that could become more if they survived tomorrow. Finally, Tommaso stepped back. Get some rest. Dawn comes early. After he left, Janet turned to Aries, who was watching her with those intelligent eyes. Big day tomorrow, buddy. We're going to expose the man who hurt you, and we're both going to survive it. The stallion huffed softly, pressing his forehead against her shoulder. Janet wrapped her arms around his massive neck, drawing strength from his solid presence. Then she forced herself to try sleeping, knowing tomorrow would require every ounce of skill and courage she possessed. 4 a.m. Janet woke with sudden, sharp awareness, the kind that came from instinct rather than sound. Something was wrong. She moved quietly to Aries' stall, checking him first. The stallion was alert but calm, not the source of her unease. Then she saw it. The tack room door was ajar. Just slightly. Enough that someone with her training would notice. She'd locked it personally before sleeping. Heart pounding, Janet crossed to the tack room and pushed the door open fully. In the dim emergency lighting, everything looked normal. Saddles in their racks, bridles hanging in precise order, nothing obviously disturbed. But her instincts screamed. She moved to Aries' saddle, the one Tommaso would use for the demonstration, and examined it with methodical care. The leather was pristine, the stitching intact, the girth straps, there. So subtle she almost missed it. A tiny slice in the girth strap's internal threading, hidden beneath the outer leather layer. Invisible to casual inspection. But under stress, under the weight of a rider and the movement of a horse, it would snap, sending Tommaso crashing to the ground, possibly under Aries' hooves. A fatal accident that could be blamed on faulty equipment or Janet's inadequate preparation. Janet's hands were steady as she photographed the evidence, her mind already racing through contingencies. Silvio had made his move. Now it was their turn. The dawn was deceptive in its beauty. Golden light spilled across the arena, painting everything in shades of honey and hope. But beneath that peaceful exterior, the compound hummed with coiled violence. Every guard was in position. Every camera was live. Every contingency was prepared. Tommaso stood in the observation gallery, watching as Marco led Aries to the arena floor. The stallion moved with elegant power, his black coat gleaming like polished obsidian. To anyone watching, he was the picture of controlled majesty, a man taming a beast. Janet stood in the shadows of the viewing platform, her hand pressed against the glass. Her blue eyes were steady, but he could see the tension radiating from her, the coiled readiness of someone prepared for everything to go wrong. Silvio entered from the opposite side, his tailored suit immaculate, his smile perfectly pleasant. But Tommaso caught the telltale signs now. The way his fingers brushed against his belt, the expensive, custom leather that had tortured an innocent animal. The subtle nod to one of the handlers positioned near the south wall. The calculated patience of a man certain of his victory. Tommaso mounted Aries with fluid grace. The stallion accepted his weight, ears forward, responding to the subtle cues with the precision Janet had taught. They moved into a gentle trot, then a smooth canter. The demonstration was flawless, perfect. Exactly as Silvio expected. Janet's hand pressed harder against the glass. Silvio made his move a small gesture, almost imperceptible. A flick of his wrist, a specific angle of his body. The pre-programmed trigger they'd learned together. Aries exploded. The stallion's entire body went rigid. His scream shattered the morning calm, that primal sound of terror overriding training. He bucked with violent desperation, his front hooves clawing at the air. Tommaso stayed mounted, his thighs gripping, his hands steady on the reins, but the arena was chaos now. The tripwire. Tommaso saw it in his peripheral vision, a nearly invisible line strung across the south wall's arena entrance, positioned at exactly the height to send both horse and rider crashing to the ground. Once they fell, Aries' panic would do the rest. Hooves would find flesh. A tragic accident, An empire destabilized. Silvio's smile widened. Janet moved. The radio crackled to life, and her voice cut through the panic like a blade, sharp, specific, absolutely commanding. South Wall, now. Not a suggestion. Not a prayer. A tactical order delivered in her Texan drawl with the authority of someone who'd never questioned their own instincts. Tommaso didn't hesitate. He leaned left, pressing his weight into his stirrup, using the subtle shift to guide Ares in a precision maneuver that would have taken any normal rider years to master. The stallion, responding to the command in Janet's voice, the voice that meant safety, meant trust, meant survival, twisted his body mid-stride. They avoided the tripwire by inches. Dust exploded where Ares's hooves struck the ground, missing the fatal line by a margin so narrow it would have been impossible without perfect partnership. Ares galloped past the sabotaged section, his panic receding as Janet's voice continued over the radio, a steady rhythm of commands that anchored him back to reality. Back to trust. Tommaso dismounted before the stallion fully stopped, his movements flowing into action with lethal efficiency. Silvio turned to run. The guards Tommaso had positioned Marco, Anthony, and 3 others were already moving. They closed ranks with coordinated precision, cutting off every exit. Silvio had maybe 3 seconds before his world ended. He chose to fight. The capo pulled a blade from his jacket, a small, efficient weapon designed for close work. He slashed at the nearest guard, his desperation lending him a dangerous edge. For a moment, there was blood and chaos, and the sound of violence. Then Tommaso reached him. The Mafia Boss moved like water, fluid and inevitable. He disarmed Silvio with a single, brutal movement that left the capo gasping. Tommaso slammed him against the arena wall hard enough to crack bone, and in that moment of impact, their eyes locked. Silvio saw everything in Tommaso's gaze. Every betrayal, every moment of doubt, every time he'd questioned his own judgment, because of the damage Silvio had orchestrated. "You were family," Tommaso said quietly, his voice dropping to that lethal register that made even hardened criminals flinch. "I trusted you with everything." "Then you were a fool," Silvio spat blood. "Power respects only power. Loyalty is a myth for the weak." Tommaso's expression didn't change. He simply nodded to Marco, who secured Silvio with practiced efficiency. "Take him to the basement. He'll have time to think about his philosophy." That was mercy, in Tommaso's world. That was giving a traitor space to live with what he'd done. The arena was clearing now, guards securing the perimeter, securing the evidence. The tripwire was photographed, documented, rendered harmless. But Tommaso's attention was fixed on one thing: Janet. She descended from the viewing platform, moving with deliberate calm, even though he could see her hands shaking slightly. The moment she reached the arena floor, he was there, closing the distance in 3 powerful strides. His hand caught her face, pulling her toward him with possession and gratitude, and something far deeper. His dark eyes blazed into hers, and she saw everything he was feeling: the relief, the admiration, the absolute certainty that she'd saved his life. "You trusted me," he whispered, the words rough with emotion. "I always do," she replied, and then his mouth found hers. The kiss was desperate and claiming, months of tension and connection pouring into that single moment. It wasn't gentle. It was a promise and a vow and a declaration of war against anyone who'd try to separate them. His fingers tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, deepening the kiss with the hunger of a man who'd spent 3 months dancing around the edge of something he couldn't name. When he finally released her, both of them were breathing hard, their foreheads pressed together in the dust and morning light. "Never leave me," he commanded, and it sounded like a prayer from a man who didn't believe in prayer. "Not planning on it," Janet murmured against his lips. "But we need to talk about what comes next." They ended up in Tommaso's private office as the chaos of the arena settled into organized precision. The view was magnificent, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the compound, the stables, the world he'd built through ruthlessness and fear. But Tommaso barely saw it. His attention was entirely on Janet, who sat across from him, her Texan composure reasserting itself even as he could see the aftershock of adrenaline in the slight tremor of her hands. "Talk to me," she said, her voice steady. "What are you feeling right now?" Tommaso stood and moved to the window, the weight of the morning settling on his shoulders. "I was going to die today. For the third time in my life. My own world almost destroyed me." He paused, his jaw tightening. "The first 2 times, I learned not to trust anyone. I built walls. Built an empire on the principle that loyalty was a lie people told themselves. And now? Now I realize I was wrong." He turned back to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression was shocking, a man stripped of his armor, standing before her completely exposed. "I almost died because I couldn't see the truth, couldn't see that the man I trusted most was poisoning everything from the inside. Couldn't see it because I was too busy maintaining control." Janet rose and approached him, her movements careful and deliberate. She took his hands, anchoring him to something real. "You trusted Aries to your instincts," she said quietly. "When I told you to move south, you didn't question. You just did. That's not blind faith. That's partnership. I've never had that before." Tommaso's fingers tightened around hers. "This life, my life, it teaches you that everyone wants something. Everyone has an angle. You learn to use people before they use you. You learn that vulnerability is death." He pulled her closer, his voice dropping. "Then you walked into my world, and you showed me something different." "What?" "That strength isn't about domination. That power isn't about control." His hands moved to her face, cradling it with unexpected gentleness. "That loyalty is chosen, every single day, by someone who has every reason to run but chooses to stay." Janet's blue eyes glistened, but she held his gaze. "I'm not going anywhere, but I need something from you. Anything. Don't make it easy." Her smile was slight but genuine. "I don't want your blind devotion or your empire or your protection. I want your honesty. I want you to keep growing, keep learning." She paused. "I want you to build something different." Tommaso's expression sobered. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this empire you've built, it's based on fear and violence. I understand why. I understand the world you came from." She glanced back at Aries, visible through the compound windows in the distant paddock. "But that horse taught me something important. You can't breed respect through trauma. You can't build loyalty through fear. It has to come from a different place." Tommaso was quiet for a long moment, processing. "You're asking me to change everything. I'm asking you to add something to everything." Janet squeezed his hands. "Keep your business. Keep your empire, but build something clean alongside it. Something that gives back instead of takes away. Something that heals instead of hurts." "Like what?" "Like a foundation. A sanctuary for abused animals. For horses like Aries. For creatures that the world threw away and deemed broken, just like everyone thought he was broken." She stepped back, her voice gaining strength. "You have resources. You have power. Use it to save something instead of destroy something." Tommaso felt something shift inside him, a fundamental realignment of purpose. "If I do this, if I build what you're describing, will you help me? That's why I'm asking." Janet's smile was radiant. "I'm asking because I see who you could become. Not the mafia boss, not the feared emperor of the underworld, but the man who chose love over legacy. Who chose to build instead of dominate." Tommaso pulled her into his chest, his arms wrapping around her with fierce tenderness. "Marry me?" he said into her hair. Janet pulled back, her eyebrow arching with dry humor. "That's bold for a morning proposal after one kiss." "I don't do subtle." His dark eyes burned with absolute certainty. "I know what I want. I've always known. I just didn't know it was you until you walked into my arena and hummed a horse into submission. That's the most ridiculous reason to propose I've ever heard. But you're not saying no." Janet considered him, this man shaped by violence and power, standing before her raw and exposed. "I'm saying yes. On one condition. Tell me. We do this right. We build the foundation. We make it real. And you never not once let the empire pull you back into the darkness." I promise. He kissed her again, and this time it was a vow, witnessed by the morning light and the distant whinny of a horse learning to trust. 6 months later, the Marchesi Animal Sanctuary officially opened its gates. The sprawling compound in upstate New York sat on 300 acres of rolling pasture and carefully designed habitats. Purpose-built stables lined a pristine arena. Expert veterinarians moved between paddocks, and everywhere was evidence of healing. Janet stood at the entrance, wearing a simple white dress instead of her usual jeans and boots, her blonde hair down for perhaps the third time since Tommaso had met her. She was stunning in conventional ways, but it was the radiance in her blue eyes that truly made her breathtaking. Because she was home. Tommaso approached in a tailored gray suit that somehow made him look both dangerous and refined, a perfect blend of who he'd been and who he was becoming. He took her hand, and the photographers snapped their shots. The Mafia Boss and the Cowgirl officially united, officially Mrs. Marchesi. The public story was carefully constructed, a businessman and an animal specialist partnering to create a healing space for traumatized creatures. The media ate it up. The truth was far more powerful. That evening, after the ceremonies and speeches and ribbon cuttings, they made their way to the sanctuary's heart, the premium paddock where Aries ran free. The stallion had transformed. His eyes, once wild with trauma, now held peace. He moved with the confidence of an animal who'd learned that not all hands came with pain. Janet had spent months rehabilitating him, and now he served as the sanctuary's symbol, a creature broken and remade, stronger because of his survival. Tommaso and Janet stood at the fence, watching him graze in the fading light. "He's happy," Janet observed, her voice full of quiet pride. "So am I." Tommaso's hand found hers, and he pulled something from his pocket, not the Rolex watch he'd worn for years, but a simple leather bracelet, beautifully tooled. Janet's work. She'd made it during the planning process, weaving her skill and love into the material. "What's this?" she asked as he fastened it to his wrist. "My new investment, my new priority." He turned to face her, his dark eyes still intense but softened by genuine joy. "I traded every expensive watch in my collection for these. This one, and all the ones I'm going to earn helping you build this." Janet laughed, a sound of pure, unguarded delight. "That's the most romantic and ridiculous thing you've ever said. I mean it." He pulled her close, their silhouettes merging against the sunset. "I hired a cowgirl to tame a stallion. I got so much more than I bargained for." "That's because you were never the problem that needed solving?" she replied, her Texan drawl warm. "But I'll tell you the secret anyway, since you asked so nicely. It's not magic. It's just knowing when to be silent and when to be dangerous." "And which are you right now?" "Both." She kissed him softly. "Always both." They stood together as the light faded, watching Aries graze. Behind them, the sanctuary's lights began to glow, a beacon of healing in a world that too often forgot about damaged things. The empire still existed. Tommaso's business interests remained extensive, but it was different now. Compartmentalized. Secondary. The sanctuary was his primary obsession now. 42 rescued horses in the first year, dogs, cats, even a sanctuary-bred wolf pack. Every animal a story of trauma transformed into triumph. And at the center of it all, Janet, not reformed, not domesticated, but evolved. She'd become Mrs. Marchesi on paper, but in practice, she remained exactly who she'd been, a woman who understood that true strength came from compassion, that real power was the ability to help others find their own. As the stars emerged above the sanctuary, Tommaso pulled out his phone and made a single call. "Marco. Everything locked down at the compound?" "Yes, boss. All secure." "Good. I won't be back for a week, running on skeleton crew unless something urgent requires my attention." "Understood, boss." He ended the call and turned his full attention back to Janet, who was already smiling, knowing exactly what his absence meant. They had built something together, not just a sanctuary for animals, but a sanctuary for themselves. A place where two people shaped by darkness and danger could choose healing, could choose partnership. could choose love. Aries lifted his head, sensing their presence, and released a soft, contented whinny. The sound carried across the paddock like a benediction. And as Tommaso wrapped his arm around Janet's waist and pulled her closer, he realized something profound. The untamable had finally found home. Not in empire or fear or dominance, but in her, in them, in the quiet certainty that loyalty, freely chosen, was worth more than any empire the world could offer. That's the end of today's story. Tell me your rating from 1 to 10, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video.